Hello, lovely Trisha. How are you?
Hello, lovely Sophie. I'm good.
It's
Nice
been
to
a
be with you.
it's been a while, hasn't it? We thought we would end the year with a one of our lovely dialogue sessions where we come together and we think and we have no idea what's going to emerge because that's the beautiful nature of dialogue. And what I thought we could think about together, and maybe I'll just introduce it and then we can come up with a question. Um,
Right.
was really to think about assumptions. And so obviously assumptions are a core part of the work we do in a thinking environment. But I suppose what I was particularly interested in was a question that came up on a faculty call last week, which was, are there core underlying untrue and limiting assumptions that are kind of inherently there for everyone? And I suppose, and then if so, does it matter? So that's what I thought we could think about together. Do you want to just kind of sort of share your initial thoughts and then maybe we can refine the question that we're going to think about together?
Yes, I mean, I would have to go back and actually see the email where Nancy's question was articulated, but from what I remember about it, and the little bit that she spoke about in her teaching piece on the faculty forum, um, the idea was that could it be said to be true that there are core bedrock limiting assumptions that are universal, whereas liberating assumptions are always generated, uniquely generated. So that there aren't, it can't be said that there are this set of core liberating assumptions that everyone shares. A liberating assumption is uniquely generated, whereas could it be said to be true that there are core bedrock assumptions that are actually pre-exist and are shared universally, something like that.
I was just trying to find it, which is why I was looking a little bit distracted. So the question was, is it possible that untrue limiting bedrock assumptions about the self and life may be universally held, but that true liberating alternative assumptions are uniquely constructed?
Yes.
Now,
Yeah.
do you think, is that a question you would like to think with
Sure.
think about, think about?
Absolutely.
So I'll just
Fascinating.
drop that into chat. So is it possible that untrue? So I suppose the first thing might be just to because some people watching this might not know what we think when we say assumptions and what we mean by assumptions. So maybe
Mhm.
I'll just kind of give my general definition and then you can add to that and then we'll kind of riff in. So when I talk about assumptions, I guess the definition of an assumption is something that we take as true and real, largely without evidence, and it is unexamined. So it is in our unconscious. So based on our experiences and observations, which we develop through a lifetime of experience and observation and sense impressions, we make assumptions about what's okay, what's not, what makes us lovable, what makes us not, what gets us attention, what doesn't. And then on the basis of those assumptions, we make conclusions around ourselves about how life works. And the difference between a belief and an assumption, and I often say they live on a spectrum, they're not completely separate things, and the definitions are very similar in that a belief is something we take as true and real, but it has been examined and it's part of our consciousness. We can articulate it, we defend it, we've probably got a relationship with it. So assumptions, for me, I would say it's assumptions that drive our behaviors. And it's
Mhm.
often assumptions that drive the way we think and feel, but we're not always aware of it. We can't think about it. What do you say, Trish? What's
I don't do anything like as articulate a job of it as that, I don't think, having listened to what you've just said. I don't think I've got much to add. I mean, I agree in terms of a definition or a working definition for this dialogue. I'm happy to go with what you've offered. Um, yeah, I'm happy to. I think that's a good working definition. Let's go with that one.
okay? And then as you were speaking, I just thought, oh, I wonder if like it would be worth sharing, like just a little bit of our own journey with assumptions,
Hmm.
because I think it's we can talk about it theoretically, but I think it's such an important part of this work. And I know for me, it was my first experience of identifying and replacing an untrue and limiting assumption that really made this work kind of not come to life. Like, I'd read the book, but when I kind of went on my first course, and that moment of, yeah, I was thinking for myself, and then I didn't have the words for it at the time, but I identified something I wanted, and then I realized there was an untrue and limiting assumption that was stopping me from doing something I wanted. And it was like a revelation. It was like almost something opened up inside of me that was a sense of, it was just new. It was, what I would now experience is like it was transformational. I went from thinking a certain way to feeling and being a different way in a moment. And I think it was that first experience of really having that embodied experience of it that kind of then catapulted me into going, I really want to learn about this. Like, this is powerful stuff. What was your experience of assumptions? What's been your journey?
Um, I mean, I can't remember back to, I mean, I remember the first thinking session that I had with Nancy when she came to South Africa to train the 8 of us that became the first sort of faculty members here in South Africa. I mostly remember the appreciation at the end of that. I don't even remember what the topic was. I think it was probably my kids. But I think one of the things that really stands out for me about my relationship to the work that we do in a thinking session where an explicit further outcome has been set, and therefore the thinker is now exploring their thinking in response to the question, well, what are you assuming that's stopping you? That it's one of the things that sort of really stays with me about that work, and I've done it over and over and over and over again, thousands of times now, is the discovery aspect of it. It's a sort of a kind of a weirdly sort of paradoxical thing, because you're discovering something that's already there, and has been there and has been running your life, but you haven't known it. So it's something about the sort of buried aspect of assumptions, and then this sort of magnificent process that we've got, which enables you to focus your attention on what they might be. And as you do that, and as you think about it, it's like, it feels to me like an archaeological dig. It feels to me like unearthing something and going, oh my gosh, no wonder. No wonder I'm behaving in the way that I'm behaving, or I'm not making progress in the way that I'm not making, because no wonder, because I've been assuming these things. And then I think one of my really favorite moments in a session is the assumption that gets unearthed in the that causes that question, which we used to call the transition question, which is where the first assumption that you've chosen that you think is the one that's blocking you turns out to be true, or possibly true. So it's not the real culprit, because we know that it's an untrue assumption that's going to be what's really in the way. And so then you answer that, well, that's possibly true. What are you assuming that's causing that to stop you from whatever your outcome is? And then the assumption that comes up there for me is often something which is, it's so transformational. I mean, I relate exactly to what you're saying. It's so transformative, because it's like finding something that's been really sort of driving the results or lack of results that you're having in your life around something that matters to you, and really imprisoning you, actually keeping you in prison. And it's like somebody's just given you the key to open the door to the prison bars, and you're just like stepping out into liberation to discover those untrue ones that are buried behind possibly true ones, because they're layered, aren't they? I mean, it is really, I think archaeology is a good metaphor for the work that we do around assumptions. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it sometimes does feel like that kind of unearthing. I mean, I often use the analogy of like Russian dolls.
Yes.
There's this almost, there's the assumption that sits on the surface, and we can kind of get to that, and then actually there will be another layer and another layer and another layer, and then actually, and I suppose this is getting to this thing about actually, are there inherent assumptions that sit at the core of lots of us, that and which we can get to in a minute. But there was something you said about the discovery element, because again, I think one of the fascinating things about assumptions is it's almost like they're hidden in plain sight. So they're there and they're driving our behavior and they drive our thoughts and our feelings, and we're not aware of them until we identify something we want, or something we want to change, or something we want to do. And then as soon as we're asked, we know. So it's not like we have to do this huge, like really hard work to kind of look for them and find them. It's like actually once we, and again, that's a hard bit of the work, is working out what we want, what is it you most want to accomplish. But once we've done the work on that, when we're then asked, and what are you assuming that is stopping you? Or what are you assuming that is making you feel that way? They're there. It's almost like the effervescence, they bubble up, and almost as if they've been waiting to kind of emerge. And yes, there is work, it can feel very work, like when, you really keep identifying true and possibly true assumptions, that can feel, but even that, they're not, it's not like we've got to go on a huge journey, they're just there. And I often laugh, because I mean, you and I, we've been doing this work a long time, and I'm like, I've still got like an army of assumptions in there. Like, it's not like, oh, you do this work once and you find an assumption and then it's gone and you're free of it forever and there's no other assumptions to be done. It's like, oh no, whatever it is I want to identify, wherever I want to grow, or whenever I want to change, or whenever I want to do something different, they're just there, but they might be slightly different. So, and I think over time my relationship with assumptions has changed, whereas before it was almost like they had a vice like grip on me, whereas now it feels much looser. Sometimes it feels like putting on an old coat. I'm like, oh, it's you again. Hello, old friend. But yeah, I mean, I still find that fascinating, that they are unconscious, we're not aware of them until we're asked, and then we know. And only we can know. Like, I can't know your assumptions, you can't know my assumptions. Like, we know. It's yeah. What do you think?
Well, I've often thought that this is, when people ask what do we mean by the quality of thinking, because we've got that observation that is, lies at the heart of the purpose and intention of a thinking environment, is to create the conditions for people to do their best thinking. And, Nancy's observation, the quality of everything we do depends on the quality of the thinking we do first. And I think what we're thinking together about today is really, it's really illustrative of what we mean by the quality of thinking that we're doing. Because the crazy thing about assumptions is that you're absolutely right. They're right there. They're motivating how we're behaving and what we're doing and what we're not doing. But people don't relate to them as assumptions. They relate to them as facts. So that's what makes the quality of our thinking suspicious and faulty, is because I'm assuming something, but I'm relating to it as if it's so. And therefore I'm not. And that's why I think they are right there. They are on the surface. They're what we're thinking all day, every day. They're what is causing us to behave in the way that we're behaving. There are opinions. If someone was to say, well, what do you think about this? You'd say what you think about it. But what you think about it is largely an assumption. I mean, unless you've been doing empirical research on the topic and peer-reviewed studies, and and it's science that we're talking about, and even with science that gets disproved, it's the fact is we don't know. So we're making it up all the time. We're making up our response to life all the time, and that's fabulous. I mean, it's fabulous that we can do that, and thank goodness we can do that, because it allows us to function. But what's problematic and what makes our thinking faulty is when we become attached to it as if it's true, and we don't keep questioning it, and we don't, as you say, hold it loosely. And that's, I think your analogy is fabulous, that thinking session work is a continual practice in holding one's thinking loosely, and having this sort of like breathing space in your thinking to kind of oxygenate it with possibility, as opposed to be attached to it um and righteous about it, which is where we get stuck, and where, you know, it's then we're not experiencing a quality of thinking that's going to shape our lives in the direction that we want it to. So yeah, it's fascinating. They're there all the time, but people walk around, you know, it's like I listen to people's conversations. I mean, I'm a real eavesdropper, and I listen to people's conversations, and I hear people say things, and I know that as they're saying them, you can tell from the tone of their voice and the effort that they're putting into what they're saying, that they're reporting on something factual, but it's an absolute assumption. You know, you can hear that it's an assumption. I walked past, I came out of the dam where I go swimming the other day, and I walked past two girls who were kind of like floating in the dam and having a chat with each other. And one of them was talking about her boss to the other. The things she was saying, I can't even remember exactly what she said now, but she sort of, and you know, he's this and he's that and he's the other thing and he's this, and you know, and it'll never work because blah blah blah. And you know, and she's reporting on her experience as if it's all factual, with no idea that she's making a whole bunch of assumptions. What do you think?
Well, I think sort of going back to like when people say to me, like, how do I know if if I'm doing good quality thinking? And what I often encourage them to do is not look for the results of the quality of the thinking in the thinking, but actually in their life. So are you, you know, is the quality of your relationships improving? Is your health where you want it to be? Are you doing work that feels meaningful and purposeful and engages you? Are you feeling aligned? You know, it's like that's where you look for the quality. And because actually it's we've got to be, there has to be something we want to think about. Because like if you said to me now, like, Sophie, what are you assuming about anything? I would have loads of assumptions about it, but it's almost like, so what? You know, it's not. And I think it's a really important thing, is it's like it's untrue assumptions that are also limiting. So I might have loads of untrue assumptions, and like the lady in the dam, all of those assumptions might well be untrue, but it's at the point at which it's limiting her in her career, in how she engages with her boss, in how she feels about her life, or how she, then it's worth investigating, isn't it? Whereas if she's like, well, I'm making all these assumptions and I don't care. I don't, you know, I don't really have to work with him, and I'm, you know, and I think it's that is kind of helping people to see that it's, yes, we have lots of untrue assumptions, but what is it you want, and is it then what's stopping you? It's worth looking at specifically, because I think that's where the kind of the possibility really lies, because they're both untrue and limiting. You know, yeah, is anything more you think or feel or want to say?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, because if we look at the flip side of what you were talking about, you know, do you have the work that you want? You know, is your health the way you want it to be? And if your answer to any of those questions is yes, I think it's also really helpful to look at, well, what are you assuming that's creating that? Because we also make liberating assumptions.
Yeah.
We do make liberating assumptions that are not, and actually this could take us back into Nancy's question, in fact, because her proposition is, are there universal, untrue, bedrock, limiting assumptions that are universally, I don't remember what word she uses, but shared, you know, that are universally held.
Yeah.
Whereas our liberating assumptions generate, uniquely generated. Whereas, you know, and I wonder about that now that we're thinking about it, because anytime you assume you can about something that you've never done before, or like a new opportunity that's presented, or you know, someone asks for a volunteer and you put your hand up, you're making an assumption that's causing you to put your hand up when somebody asks for a volunteer. which is I can give it a go. That's a liberating assumption. I'm not sure that I know what you're asking for yet, or what it'll require of me, or whether I've got what it takes. But in that moment, I'm assuming I can give it a go. And I'm assuming that even if we discover that it's more than I've bitten off more than I can chew, we'll be able to handle that. Another liberating assumption. So I'm actually thinking now, because we are doing that too. I think where liberating assumptions are uniquely crafted is in response to the removing of an untrue one that's been stopping you. But now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder whether there aren't universally shared liberating assumptions, which are, and maybe there's a difference in the way in which they're held, but I think that there could be universally held liberating assumptions, like it's worth giving it a try. You never know till you try. There you go. I mean, that is a universally held liberating assumption. You'll never know till you try. I don't know that someone uniquely came up with that. And then how did I get that? And actually, that's what Nancy's question made me think about. If there are untrue, universally held bedrock limiting assumptions, how did they get to be there? How did they get to be universally held? I mean, I know that the untrue limiting bedrock assumptions that I got from my parents, and I'm pretty sure my parents got them from their parents, who I'm pretty sure got them from their parents, who I'm pretty sure got them from their parents. They get handed down. Or, and if they don't get handed down by parents, they get handed down by societal narratives. I'm thinking of some of the things that my dad used to say. If it's easy, it's not worth having. You've got to work hard for what's worthwhile and stuff like that. Those are societal assumptions. I mean, my dad came from real, working class stock, north of England, working class stock, left school when he was 12, went to work in the factory with his dad. So he had a lot of those, needs must and work hard assumptions. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting because when I first read the question, I was like, yeah, of course there are. I was a bit like, because I've often said to people, now I'm a bit like, I'm not sure if this is, but I think there are kind of inherent human needs to feel safe, to feel a sense of love and connection, and to feel belonging. And I think that need for, am I safe? Do I belong? Am I worthy of love? I think they are inherent. I can't prove that, but I think they are. We need those to survive as babies. So we need to feel safe. We need to feel that we belong, and we need to feel that we're worthy of love and connection. And so for me, I was like, and even when you were talking there, I was like, well, actually, all of the other assumptions, you could sit on top of that. So if I feel worthy, then I can assume I can try and make mistakes. If I'm feeling, if I hold that as an untrue assumption that I'm not worthy, I won't put my hand up, because people are going to see I can't do it, and I'm assuming I'm going to be made to a fool of, or I'm assuming I'm going to. And so the other assumptions kind of can very easily sit on top of those. But I kind of think if you unpicked a lot of assumptions, ultimately they would get back to, I don't feel safe, I don't feel like I'm enough, I don't feel like I belong. And again, it might be slightly different words. But, and then as you were talking, I was like, and then I could really easily see how those, so when I feel safe, when I feel worthy of love and belonging, when I feel connected, that's what enables me to have liberating and true assumptions. So it might be slightly different words, but I think, and maybe that's what makes them universal. Like, it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter what your background is. We all need, I think it is a need, I don't think it's a want. I think we all need to feel safe. We all need to feel connected. We all need to feel a sense of belonging. I think we need that. Yeah, what do you think?
So then do you think I agree with you. Do you think then, and this is so connected to what I've been writing my last couple of newsletters about, because I'm really, really fascinated with this psychology of needs
Mm.
and how I think, I mean, this is all very much a work in progress at the moment, but I think that the relationship that we have, the experiences that we have from the minute we arrive, of the way in which those needs are met, begins the process of laying down this sort of strata of assumptions that we then carry with us into the rest of our lives. So that if you, for example, if you're parented by people that know about attachment theory and parent you in that way, then primarily the experience you're going to be having from the get-go is, I can get my needs met, I am safe,
Mm.
I am worthy of love, I do belong, I am cared for, life is benevolent, um, life meets my needs, uh, my my messages are heard and received and understood and responded to in ways that, because I mean, as babies, we're messaging in very sort of primal, unsophisticated ways that other people have to interpret. Um, and similarly, if that's not your experience, which is that, I'm I wrote about this in my latest newsletter. I mean, at 7 months old, I know for a fact I went through an experience of being zipped up in an oxygen tent and left on my own. I'm pre-verbal, I'm 7 months old, no one's there. And I don't know if anyone came when I cried. I know people must have been checking up on me. The reason I was in an oxygen tent was because I wasn't doing a good job of breathing for myself. So they must have been checking up on me, but there must have been periods of time when there was no one there and I was literally all on my own. And what and the funny thing about that pre-verbal stuff is, because I didn't have language at that point, how could I have even laid down an assumption? Because assumptions get laid down in language. So that's always fascinated me as well. You know, what are we laying down before we've got words to describe it? But we're laying it down nonetheless, because we're having an experience of either needs met or not met. What do you think?
Yeah, it's really interesting what you just said, because I think actually assumptions get laid down in feelings and sense impressions. I think the
Mm,
words come later. That
mm,
part of our brain is a later development piece. But I think as babies, we are, and children, and young adults, we are experiencing, observing, and trying to make sense of the world. And all of that sense impression kind of comes in. And again, as a baby or as a young, you wouldn't call it assumptions. You're just making sense of your world. And I think what's really always fascinates me about assumptions is, at the point at which we make them, they're the most appropriate response to circumstances. So we do whatever we need to do to feel safe, to feel like we belong, and to feel connected to the people around us, even if that means armoring up, even if that means reducing our own needs, because we will choose connection before we choose our own, thriving. We and so I think, and also, of course, assumptions are part of a family unit, a social unit, a cultural unit, and that's why I always think, like, siblings can have the same family, but they'll have completely different experiences because they've made completely different observations. They've sensed things differently. And so sometimes you think, well, how have I got the same sibling? We're completely different. It's like, because what you experienced and the assumptions you made were different to me, because our parents were at different stages and the environment was different. And so of course it's going to be, it's not like a one-off event. It's
mm,
multiple, and that is generational. So it takes a lot, I think, to understand, well, these are the assumptions I internalized, and which ones of those are limiting me and which ones don't I want to hand on to my children. So I've got to do the work to ensure that I don't hand that on. Um, but often, as again, I think in thinking sessions, sometimes people they'll be exploring something and actually it's a feeling response. So they'll say, I don't know why I'm crying, or oh God, my body feels different. And I think it's because the assumption is being released as it got embedded, which was as a feeling. And then we try to make sense of it, but actually we don't need to, because the job of the feeling is to get felt and then allow you to heal. So yeah, and I think, going back to that example of a baby, like we're all very vulnerable. I mean, we're very vulnerable as adults. We just pretend we're not, but we are very vulnerable, and we're very dependent on caregivers, and we're very dependent on, the environment that we're in. And so as we're thinking about it, it's like I do think there are universal needs. I do. And because of that, I think there probably are universal assumptions that root back. It's like almost if you imagine the roots of a tree, there's kind of like they go out and out and out and out. And it's like actually at that far reaches, what is it that connects us all? Is probably, yeah, a need to belong, a need to feel safe, a need to, and maybe there's more, maybe it's not just those three. I like three. So, maybe that's, what do you think? What's.
Well, I'm still, I love what you've said about, I think you've really given me a kind of a piece of the puzzle in terms of what you've said about assumptions occurring at the level of feelings and sensing. And it later gets translated into verbalization. We put words to it later. I think that's something that I want to take away from this dialogue and think about some more. But I am really quite fascinated by this question, which I asked a minute or two ago, and I'd love to put it to you again and see what you think, which is, so we can understand quite easily that if there are fundamental needs that human beings have, that what could appear to be universally held untrue limiting assumptions are derived from and become universally held because the fundamental needs are universally held regardless of background, culture, where you were born, what the socioeconomic status of your parents was, or anything like that. Those are added layers of complexity, but that there are these fundamental human needs that you have, whether you're Amazonian Indian baby in the middle of the jungle, or whether you're a wasp born to a millionaire in New York. But that the nature of the untrue limiting assumptions that then could be described as also universally held and bedrock are to do with the stuff that we come up with in order to meet those needs in moments of them being of a failure for them to be met. So I need to feel safe, and right now I'm not feeling safe, so I come up with something in order to try and restore feeling safe. And I need to belong, and right now I don't feel like I belong, so I come up with something in order to try and restore a sense of belonging. Or I need to feel connected, and right now I'm not experiencing that, so I come up with something in order to try and restore a sense of connection. And I think I could be wrong, because we didn't do anything like this depth of thinking about it in the faculty forum. I'm wondering if what Nancy's question is asking is the stuff that we come up with universal in those moments? Like, do all human beings come up with the same assumptions in order to survive moments of not belonging, not feeling connected, not feeling safe? And that those then get laid down as these kind of universally shared untrue limiting assumptions. Because otherwise, what are we talking about here? And so what I'm wondering is, whether that's true, whether there's any validity to that, because we do know that there are universally shared or seemingly universally shared bedrock limiting assumptions like I don't matter, I'm not good enough, nobody loves me, it's not safe, I'm not safe, life's not safe, you can't trust people, whatever. But is it also true that in moments of those needs being met, of I do feel safe, I do feel connected, I do feel a sense of belonging, that there are universally generated liberating assumptions then, like it's worth a try, or no, it doesn't matter if I fail, I can give it a go, I'm a work in progress. It's one of my favorite liberating assumptions. I'm a work in progress. It's totally liberating, and I can apply that to any situation at any time, and it works. I wonder, what do you think?
I think my first thought, Trish, is that there might well be, but the way in which we would articulate and verbalize that would be unique to us because of the way we use language to make sense of our experiences is so dependent on the environment that we're brought up in. You know, what we're, you know, just how we speak, you know, how we communicate is very context dependent. And so I think, I suppose my first thought is possibly, but I don't think it would look or sound the same. I think it might have the same feeling tone, but how you would describe, I mean, in all my experience though, like in a thinking environment, there is definitely a very common assumption that I'm not good enough. You know, that comes up a lot in that wording, you know, but does that mean that's universal? No, it means potentially the group I work with, that's a language we use because that's in Western community, you know. So would, if I was working with other popular, you know, would it be different? I don't know. I'm trying to think of what other ones. I think there are assumptions about trust, safety that come up. Yeah. But I think the exact wording would be different in the same way that when you have a true and liberating alternative, that's unique, you know, because that's constructed from so would there be a universally held, and maybe this, I mean, my thought now is like, does it matter? Like, as in, potentially yes, potentially no. I think I'm loath to call anything universal because I'm so aware of how insignificant my experience of life is. You know, like the only experience I truly know, and even that, I doubt my credibility of my own thoughts a lot of the time is my own, you know. So I think there is something about the word universal that I struggle with. Maybe that's because I'm not brave, you know, maybe, but I think that it's very hard to say something is universal. I mean, there are a few things, like I think back to like Buddhism, you know, there is suffering, there's a way out of suffering. You know, there are things that we can say. But is it universal? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think maybe if I wasn't fixated on the word universal, so maybe if the question was, is it possible that untrue limiting bedrock assumptions maybe universally held? So there's a bit of me that goes, yes, you know, and then there's another bit of me that is like, how can we say anything's universal? Yeah, how do we do that? But do I, sitting here now, believe that it's been a common enough articulation to be interesting and to be worth sharing? I think, yeah, it probably is. Does it matter if it's you know, described, articulated in common ways? Possibly not. Don't know. What do you think? That was my get out of jail free card. Like, what do you think, Trish? I'm out.
Well, I do feel as if we're at the tip of an iceberg on this question. You know, I think it's a big topic. I mean, actually, interestingly enough, where my thinking started to sort of morph into as I was listening to your turn was common humanity and the experience of common humanity, and whether that is universal. And I think it is. I think I could go with that. I think I could find myself in the middle of the jungle and and with a I don't know whether this is true or not, because I've never had the experience to be able to test the theory, but I think I could find myself in the middle of the jungle with a tribe of people that I have absolutely no common language with, and we would find a way to communicate, and we would find a way to connect, and that over time, under the right circumstances, I could find a way to belong in that environment, and that before long we'd be laughing together, even if we couldn't necessarily prove to one another that we were laughing about the same thing. It wouldn't matter, because we would have that shared experience of connection and bonding. And I think, yeah, I think that there are some things that can be said to be universal, but I don't know how many of them are, and whether or not there are universally held untrue limiting assumptions. I think I think exactly what you've been saying, that there's I've listened to people that come from very different backgrounds and cultures to me in thinking sessions, and I've heard them articulate assumptions which are completely recognizable to me. Um, yeah, and I do think that there's an aspect to Nancy's question, which is the uniquely generated nature of liberating true assumptions, which is definitely uniquely generated and totally unique to that person, when it's in response to the removing of an untrue limiting assumption that they've identified. And they're now generating what is true and liberating. And it's in the context of the further outcome that they're seeking to make progress towards. And you can see that in the articulation, you can see that what they choose, where they choose to go, and how they choose to word it, and the impact that it has on them, that's all completely to do with them uniquely. But I do also think that there could be universally enough, put it like that, held liberating assumptions. And I'm really coming back to this thing of, it depends on the experience that you have of the meeting of those fundamental human needs, and the very, very earliest experiences that you have of that, as to, and I think both happen, you know, even if you have a lot of experience of your needs being met, you are also going to have inevitably the experience of the failure of those needs being met. It seems to me to be, that's what we go through as human beings. We go through the unmet needs, and then the recovery from that, and that our journey towards what Jung referred to as self-actualization, or Maslow, is how good a job we do of learning to recover from the consequences of the failure of our needs being met, and what we did to ourselves in those moments, and kind of recovering wholeness again. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at, and I think we could be getting towards the end of our time for this as well, but I'll hand it over to you for a last term. What do you think?
We've gone over as always. I think as you were speaking, Trisha, it made me really actually, like, it enables me to kind of hold myself and also everyone else with a lot more compassion. Because actually, if what people are trying to do is recover a sense of, you know, or live in a way that makes them feel safe, that makes them feel connected, makes them feel worthy, and even though that might be a very muddled way of doing it, it's made sense to them. You know, it's like, it just goes back to that real, as you say, human need about actually we're all just doing the best we can with what we got given. And also really, I think, helps explain why for some people the same experience will be internalized very differently because of sensitivity, because of whatever, because of a whole layering of inputs, as to then the assumptions that did get embedded and the responses we made to that. It's like, and how we manage that. But I also think there is something about and taking responsibility for our own assumptions, that actually it's deeply empowering, deeply it is deeply transformational work when we're willing to do this, to really understand what we're assuming and how that's limiting us. And it was funny, as you were talking, I thought, it's like my children have, I was already a practitioner when I had children, and so to the best of my ability they have grown up in a thinking environment, and I know they're going to make loads of assumptions. Like, I cannot avoid my children making untrue and limiting assumptions about me, about them, about other people. But I guess what I hope to have created is an environment that actually at its bedrock they do feel safe and they do feel like they belong. And so their ability to question those assumptions will come much quicker and much more easily to them. They won't get as embedded as mine were. And maybe that's all our work is for the next generation. We enable them to loosen the grip a little bit more. We're not going to be able to get rid of them completely, but can I make it a little bit easier for my kids than it was for me? Can they then make it a little bit easier for the next generation? And that to me feels hopeful. It's not that I'm trying to remove them or feel responsible for my children never having them, or for myself never having them, but am I willing to take responsibility?
Lovely. That's a great way to end, I think. What do you think?
I think it's been lovely to think about. Should we close there? Should we finish
Yeah.
with an appreciation?
Yes, I'll go first. Um, hmm, let me think. I mean, I've seen your mothering and I've seen your kids with you. And I think what I want to appreciate about you today is the fertile soil for their self-expression that you have cultivated for them in the way that you've mothered them. Yeah, it's been a beautiful thing to watch as you've grown in your mothering. Yeah, good job. Well done.
Thank you. They're very easy to mother. Oh, and Tricia, what I really appreciate today is the quality of, like, I'll say it and then I'll get to the word, but your willingness to share vulnerability and courage in order to help others be vulnerable and courageous. So you are so willing to share. So it's generosity. That's what I want to appreciate, your generosity of sharing what is really important to you in order to connect and allow other people to feel safe and worthy and a sense of belonging. So it's your generosity, Trish.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
My love.